Hello again. In the beginning of this exhibition, Intersection, at Dana Wiley's gallery, I talked about the relationship of essentially three different themes over the past 6-7 years, and how they've grown out of each other, how they're similar and somewhat different. And so I wanted to start with the beginning theme, and with this painting in particular, because it was among the first works I did when I started dealing with primarily lines, linear abstraction. I came to this after becoming really engaged with nature, particularly full-bodied nature, fecundity, on a trip to Costa Rica with my wife. And coming back from that trip, while I had worked on landscape in the past, those images, which focused primarily on trees within a forest context, a complex array of lines in space, the reference in those images was very clear. You were aware of the type of space you were in. It was drawing from perception. These drawings started with sketches and studies that were simply executed with lines drifting across a surface, whether it was paper or canvas or an etching plate or litho stone. And I wanted the references to be generic, but not from observation. I wanted them to be remembered. And I also wanted to attempt to make an image that was as complex or as fecund as I possibly could. So in the case of drawings on paper, I would put the pencil down and not lift it up. I would simply move it and not start and stop. So these lines were, by definition, contiguous. And that grew for a while. I started to exhibit some of the work, and happily it got a very good reaction. And this painting is a classic example of a painting that evolves. As I've mentioned before, this painting started in a landscape orientation and was part of that series, the Woods series, that lasted about a decade in the 1990s. And after this series of biomorphic remembrances started and got some notice, I decided this image should change its orientation to be similar to what most of the drawings were, and to exhibit some of the same linear characteristics of a moving, contiguous line that you weren't exactly sure where it started and where it stopped. And in the process of doing that, these biomorphic lines, which you can see in the painting, clearly outnumber any rectilinear, straight, or architectural line. There are some that are in there, but the vast majority have a kind of a movement or a generic reference to plant form, basic plant form. And then the color becomes part of that process of drawing. A dear colleague of mine asked a question during the talk that I gave: how do the shapes in your drawings and paintings grow out of the lines? And it's a tricky question because they both have a very similar beginning. In other words, I can start with line, and when lines intersect or join or surround, you are creating shapes. So the shapes kind of evolve in this organic fashion. And then how do you articulate the shape? How do you give any emphasis to one shape or over another? Or how do you make those shapes interact with each other on the surface? And color is a good example, though not the only one. You can agitate a surface in any number of ways. In a drawing, you can use hatching. You can impart texture, which actually color does. And in painting, the texture is more easily achieved by overlapping and using layers of translucent or transparent color. And so then you have shapes within shapes. In some cases, it's a simple issue of the surrounding line compartmentalizes an area, and then you can leave that and emphasize it just by putting a single or a group of colors that relate within that shape. That is not my favorite way to develop shapes. I'd rather have shapes migrate within the edge contours of the linear elements in varying ways, in almost surprising ways. And then those colors, shapes, textures, and whatnot can relate to pieces of information, if you will, all over the canvas. So again, the idea was to try to create a fecund, almost not understandable or comprehensible surface. Did I come close to nature? No, you can never do that. But I think the painting is one that makes you migrate around the surface and try to find connections where there are no clear objective references. And I like that process. In fact, it's a process that I've always used, and I think if you ask any artist, whether they are figurative painters or abstract painters, they would have the same response. You're not slavishly trying to reproduce what's in front of you. So there's a dialectic in your head, an argument that you're having, and that was the beginning of this series. The next time, I will talk about the next phase and how that series relates in very obvious ways, but also slightly different than what we're looking at here.